You are listening to the Green Living Chats podcast, brought to you by Eco Amet Solutions, Ghana. I'm your host, David. Today might not be the first time you hear about climate change, and it will definitely not be the last time because it's one of the most complex global issues we are facing today as a result of our own actions. The speed and impact of climate change has become very prominent in recent years, and mitigation and adaptation will be our best choice if we want to preserve the Earth's living privileges. Joshua Amponsem is the founder of Green African Youth Organization and a very passionate climate change advocate. Joshua has been very active in climate change adaptation and circular economy projects all around the world and has been serving with various international organizations. He led in the authorship of Adapt for Our Future, which is the first background paper on youth and climate adaptation, which led to a global youth consultation to produce the Global Youth Call for Action at the Climate Adaptation Summit in 2021. Joshua joined me on the podcast today to discuss the urgency of climate change adaptation. Our response to climate change better be now, and one of the major methods we can use is to educate people. So stick around with us today on this conversation. Here we go. Hello, Joshua. Thank you so much for joining me on the Green Living Chats. It's really good to finally meet you. I've been seeing a lot of things about you, and I must tell you that I'm really impressed, and I'm really encouraged about the things that you've been able to achieve and putting our name on the globe all the time. Welcome.
Thank you very much, David, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for reaching out, and it's also always a pleasure for me when peers and other young colleagues also sort of appreciate the work that we all do and also provide the space to promote that. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're really welcome. You know, I love what you're doing so much, but unfortunately, I have to say this. I have a little problem with you.
Okay.
You will not like it, but I have to say it. Unfortunately, you went to Opokuwari school. It's really unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. You just needed to go to a better school.
All right, that tells me you attended Prempeh College.
No. We do infant. No, you should know there is only one school in Ghana. Amponsem school and the rest. I'm sorry.
Oh, come on. I went to UCC, and in UCC, I just before I had a very good image of Amponsem, very competitive and everything. And once I went to UCC, I was like, these guys cry. There not be anybody. Make we dog them. So I'm equally also really disappointed now. I thought you probably would go to a better school, but anyways.
It's okay. Just for the sake of my audience, I'm really going to keep this conversation going. Otherwise, would have ended it now.
It would have probably ended up in a very big war between Uguaman and the Ashantis.
I tell you. But Joshua, it's really good to have you, and I'm really glad that we can be able to have this conversation today. You know, your journey has been interesting. The first time you accepted that you're going to come on the podcast, I just was like, okay, let me just Google this guy and see. Oh my God. I was like, nest. It's not just about the nest, but it's about the good work. You know, where did this interest start? How did you get into this? What did you see around you? I mean, I have so many questions, but I just want you to tell us your story. I know you've said this several times, but just let us know where this interest came from.
Thanks a lot, David. Very nice, kind words from you. To make it brief, I think the interest originated from our education system. So our education system gives you a lot of information. It gives you a lot of knowledge and insights, What it doesn't do, or at least for me, what it wasn't doing was how to actually apply that everything I was receiving. So, I mean, from Kumasi, as you would know now, I went to Pokwari School, moved to Cape Coast. First time seeing the sea, very beautiful, very amazing. Spent a lot of time on the beach. And then, studying environmental science in the classroom with everything about environmental management, integrated coastal zone management, which was a very amazing course, lots of knowledge. But then the moment I step out of the classroom and I go to the beach, it's a completely different world. So the question occurred to me, how do I reconcile the two? What I'm getting in the classroom and all that energy, motivation. And I mean, my lecturers, I could feel like they should be presidents because they had way too much knowledge and insights on
That's
how to
true.
make the environment better. But the moment I get out of the campus, I feel like, okay, it's really not the case. And yes, that was the starting point for me. And I even remember asking one of my lecturers, like, if we have all this insight and you know all of this, why is Cape Coast still like this? And I remember his response was, as a teacher, it is his responsibility to give that knowledge to all the students, and the students need to decide how to proceed with that knowledge. And that was really the challenge for me, that, okay, it's my responsibility now to convert this information, insights, and knowledge into something. And that was the starting point of trying to reconcile that, working with communities, talking to them about everything that I was learning in the classroom, but also then even understanding much better that the community actually had more knowledge to offer
Yeah.
than what I was getting in the classroom. It's just a matter of articulation, documenting, and putting frameworks behind what is happening, right? So that was really, and also even on a personal level, and I'm not ashamed to say this, my academic performance was really bad in my first 2 years in university. When I started activism and I started like reconciling this approach of taking the knowledge from classroom, working with communities, having conversations with fishermen, with people who are walking on the beach, either practicing open defecation or dumping waste unnecessarily or irregularly, cutting mangrove to smoke fish. All these practices, which I know were bad, and I started engaging communities about this. It gave me way like a lot of information and sort of understanding behind the actions that we criticize in society. And that, for some reason, my last 2 years of university, it's like moving a student from being a very like below average student to becoming like an excellent student, and becoming like, oh, what happened to him? But it was just that reconciliation process. So that was the starting point. And from there, of course, one conversation leads to another. While you try to fix one problem, you realize that, oh, it's not just about the open defecation, it's not just about the plastic waste, it's not just organic waste, it's just a compound issue that keeps unpacking, and you keep unveiling, discovering one issue after the other. And it kept me moving to now where I am now. Yeah.
It's a very interesting story, but how was this transition for you? Because just like a lot of universities and a lot of students, the youth just think the transition from school to the working phase, it's a little bit difficult for us, especially when you want to start your own thing, because there are a lot of things you have to think about. I love the environment. I think about the environment. I'm seeing problems in the environment, but I also need to make a family. I need to think about how to get money, because that's what the society expects from me. My parents expect that I will grow, take care of them, get some money. How did you balance this? How was a transition for you, and how did it go for you? It might help someone who is in your situation right now.
Yeah, true. I think the to I mean, I can tell a long story, but I think the shortest answer I could give is that, you don't have to start something by yourself to make to reconcile, to do this reconciliation. You don't have to start something out of the blue. That is the first thing. The second thing is, someone is probably, I mean, you are not the only person to have thought of this. Let's be honest. Everything in this world, you can have a million people who this idea come to them every morning.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of the courage to actually get out and do it. And someone might have already started and paused, started and failed, started and decided to stop. And you need to reconnect to people like that because it helps. So this was my starting point to start volunteering with organizations who were doing something similar, to start asking them, is there anything I could do to help? By the way, we have this issue in Cape Coast. Is there anything I could do to support the organization to do this in Cape Coast? And I did this for, I mean, over like more than 3 years of just making myself available to do anything to support anyone who was working on a similar topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a very good experience was the Ghana Youth Environmental Movement, GEM. So Ghana Youth Environmental Movement back in 2014 was organizing a power shift. I wrote to them. I said, look, we are a student in Cape Coast with some friends. We're really concerned about these issues. We want to do something. Just let us know how we can help, right? And they gave us the room to support an event they were organizing, to do their social media, to even come in with presentations, to deliver remarks, because they had also important stakeholders at this event. But doing things like this is the starting point. You don't have to commit or all of a sudden switch from a student to completely doing this full time. Like you said, you need the money, you need to work and whatever. So try to balance it bit by bit until you get to the point where you feel like, okay, you could independently rely on just activism or just running something or just working in an NGO to make a living. Don't just hop from one to the other.
Exactly.
The reason for this is also because you need to learn to do. If you don't learn how to do it and you just go straight into wanting to make a change, so you just start anyhow, you are going to crash, and then you are going to the dream will not be realized.
Yeah,
So it's worth taking some time to follow the footsteps of
exactly.
people who have already started, who have already done it, learn from them. And you need to ask yourself every now and then, is it worth even starting something, or I just do this in support of an existing thing? At the end of the day, the focus should be on what is the impact and not how many existing NGOs, initiatives, projects, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is there. The problem has to be solved, whether it's being solved with 100 people working together, 10 people working in 10 separate groups, it has to be solved. So you need to also ask yourself these questions. And yes, get a job. Get a job, take care of yourself. You need to be alive, you need to be healthy, you need to be mentally stable to make impact after all. So prioritize that as well.
Yeah. You said this so rightly. But we have a problem here, Joshua. Why climate change? There are so many things that you could have gotten yourself into, but why did you choose climate change? Because I've spoken to quite a number of people, and everyone has a particular story. Sometimes it's quite a very emotional story, and I wonder why climate change, and why did you see the essence to get into this?
Okay. Two answers because there are two different stories to this. Where I started and why climate change, and where I am now and why climate change. So I'll start with the before. So before, I mean, climate change because one, I started with waste management and environmental management in general, and I started working on that. And then I realized that okay, but this is also influenced by quite some factors. And okay, the human activities and human interventions also influence environmental quality, but these are even short term, right? And then I came to the realization, oh, now we are even in a bigger trouble with the changing climate, because if you, I mean, first I'm concerned about people polluting the coastline, people polluting the lake. You will know Lake Bacano in Cape Coast, for
Yes.
instance, right? And like this is a big problem. It has to be fixed. So my mind frame was on these specific ecosystems,
Yes.
and then to realize that oh, they even feed into a bigger issue. Like now, if all these lakes are getting destroyed, if all these coastal zones are getting destroyed, if we're losing so much mangrove, then it's influencing climate. And when climate change, of course, is getting intense, the side effect is also affecting us even more. So that was like, oh, okay. So environmental management, yes, but there's a bigger issue, climate. And we need to focus that. That is not just about, oh, one small water body getting destroyed, but it's also that, okay, it serves as a carbon sink. It contributes to the whole hydrological system, hydromet, and this is a huge issue, and that has to be solved, not just because it's a nice lake to have to just fish and feed yourself, but because it has a larger ripple effect in the ecosystem. Fast forward now, my now definition of why climate change is just the inequality that exists in this topic. So before, like I said, it's about the ecosystem, it's about, like nature and everything. And now it's more about, okay, it's humans and how basically the political economy has put us into certain categories that one part of the world has to suffer tremendously and the other part still would have a bit of a leverage because of climate change, because we can't control the distribution of the impacts of climate change. So it's disproportionate. We know that some countries, some communities suffer higher than the others, and we can't necessarily control the hazard that counts. What we can control is rather the support, the infrastructure, the capacities of these countries and these communities to adapt, respond to this changing climate. And that is a bigger issue for me now because I think of this from my grandmother. I use my grandmother, my family in the village as an example. So they really now are in sort of this middle ground of should I actually keep being a farmer because it's not worth it anymore. But this is what they've known for quite some time. And we still need farmers because we need people to grow food and we need people to grow food in a healthy way, not just laboratory made and industrial farming. These communities and people like that are now having to suffer high temperatures, extended dry periods, making farming more difficult. If there is floods and they suffer any impact at all, they don't have any means to recover, right? And then you have let's say a community in the Netherlands, for instance, or in Germany or in Switzerland, right?
Yeah.
And they don't have to think about this because if, regardless of the amount of rainfall and the temperature rise, they have a certain leverage, a certain comfort, a certain buffer that makes them more resilient than my family in the village. Yet, the science says that we have 10 years to fix the climate crisis. We have until 2030. We don't have until 2030. My family in the village don't have until 2030. Their issue is now and they need it fixed now. So that even boiled me up over the past years. I was like, you know what, this is just too much inequality in this system. And we even have a bigger reason why we need to fix the climate crisis and why we need to advocate for climate action, because it's not just about the climate and making the world a better place and all of that, but it's really about, look, half of the world being, excuse me to say, stepped on, and the other half sitting in the luxury of a certain comfort, coming up with definitions and with different policy directions and whatever, and saying, we have 10 years, we have 5 years, we need to do this, we need to do that. Well, they are not the ones really sitting in the position where you have to decide whether you go to farm the next morning, whether the next raining season will make you a refugee, whether the next heat wave is going to kill your grandmother or whatever. So that has been really the driving point for me at this stage. Yeah.
Unfortunately, just like you're saying, a lot of people are not seeing the agency of this. We don't see why this is a problem. And you have already mentioned that because some people have a buffer solution, some people have other ways through which they can escape the effect of this. But what do you think we can do, or what do you think we can say in our advocacy or in our awareness campaigns to tell people and to make everyone to be more concerned about this, about the impact of climate change? How do we package this message and how do we let people know the agency of this? Because the people who can make the change are relaxed. And there is no other way to say this. They are really relaxed. Everyone is saying that 2030, we're going to do this. 2050, we're going to do this. In 5 years, we're going to ban this. Meanwhile, it can be done today. See how fast the COVID vaccines came. How long does it take for a normal vaccine to be made? And now we have it as quick as within a year. So, how can we package our messages and how can we tell people about the agency of climate change?
Thanks a lot. I think one is that we need to understand the problem a bit better than we do. That is, we the ones advocating, because the thing is that society and policymakers and all of that, I mean, these are systems that respond to the pressure being applied, and the sort of reaction that comes from them is sort of how much is being put in. Of course, climate change is a bit different because we've seen a lot of advocacy and nothing happening so much. But we have to understand better to know what we are even asking for. And I think that if at the start we had already asked, we understood the issue better, and we had asked enough at the beginning, we would have gotten much better ahead than now. So before we had, before there were data, by 2100, at some point it became by 2150, and now by 2130. I mean, these things keep dwindling, right? For the average person, this is probably even confusing.
Yeah.
But we as people in our messaging should break it down to the very basic things. You talk to a community and they have to understand the essence of Atiwa forest and it's relevant to climate change for a community. It has to really come down to the basics of life: water, food, shelter. I mean, these are three essential things we all know as the basic essentials of life: clean water, good food, shelter, and just that security element. And climate change is threatening all these three things, right? It's threatening our food security. It's threatening the water availability, distribution, and patterns for agriculture, for livelihood, for everything. And then if you get extreme events, then shelter even becomes an issue. So we're talking really about human security here, not something for nature or anything of that sort. It's about human security, and every action we take, it's necessary at this point. The other bit, I mean, this is really for community level, like starting the conversation. Why sustainable agriculture is better. Why it's important not to use so much chemicals in farming. Why it's essential not to burn your waste. Why it's essential to, all these basic things that individuals can do. That is fine. Now let's go to the businesses. It's even more critical there because these businesses are driving, literally, now we are living in a world where we don't control what we do anymore. Even though we say we have free will, we don't have free will. The moment I get onto the internet right now and I search for the rent of a house in Accra, for sure the next 1 week, I will be receiving advertisement anytime I open any platform at all about rent in Accra. I didn't ask for that. It wasn't a free will. It is just something they just show you. And then you get distracted, you get pulled away, whatever. So we don't really live in a world of free will anymore. And these businesses hold the key to that. So it's very essential that these businesses, our advocacy there, it's really essential that we ask for the most significant things and not just focus on the individual actions, and because the individuals don't have free will anymore. I mean, to be honest, it's all about what is being put on your screen and what you see on the television all the time, and it's just framing your thoughts, your desires, and everything. So really a lot of work is needed there on the business side and the media to really shape our thinking as to which future we are heading towards. But if you just show me on a screen, I mean, once in 3 months, about if someone living in Sweden, you show the person about a flood in Sudan once on a screen at news. I mean, why should the person really take so much to think about this? It's a one-time thing they saw on their news and it's gone. If we make it everyday, present day reality, there's a cyclone here, there's a flood here, there's a drought here, there's this here, there's this here. This is a global problem. We keep seeing it the way we keep seeing advertisement everywhere we go. We keep hammering it. It becomes part of the way we think, the way we do everything. It becomes a global problem. For us now, even though it's a global problem, it's an urgent problem for half of the world.
Yeah.
And just another problem for another half of the world, which doesn't give the balance of driving ambition towards climate action, right? So this is very important. And then for policymakers, the issue is that the policymakers are very tied to the businesses. The industry and the policymakers, they work together. So for a policy to change in the favor of the average person and what you want, it means that the businesses must probably be okay with it or have enough advocacy such that the government can say no. They just have to do it. And this is important that we really push for the advocacy bits or for the government to really be not linked to the businesses so much that they are able to set policies for the general good and not just to satisfy the economic bit, right? Because of course we keep talking with GDP as an example, and we keep working with GDP, but GDP will not be the only thing at some point. It's going to be, again, the basics of life. Good food, good clean water, shelter, clean air, basic things you need. And if you don't have these elements, clean air, clean water, clean food, a place to lay your head, I mean, it doesn't matter how much money you have. I mean, you need to breathe, you need to eat quality food, you need to drink water. And if you can't have that, that is a problem. So I think we need to bring it down to the basics of life and get policy, businesses, all of them to align their thoughts to this and drift a little bit away from economic growth as we see it today. I'm not saying economic growth is not good, especially for sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
We need economic growth. The thing is that it shouldn't be the only benchmark for growth as we see it. There should be some sort of a quality of life criteria of determining the growth of countries, aside just how much money they make per capita or people have per capita in the country. It should be, I mean, what is the happiness level? What is the quality of life in terms of natural ecosystems? You know, so if someone is then feeding off industrial processed food, and someone is living in a very good quality soil, quality food, less chemicals, whatever, there should be a bit of focus on that as well, even if the economic levels are a bit lower, right? That also becomes essential. But I feel like the whole world has gone into this era of chasing economic growth, which makes everything about economics and nothing about actual green development or green growth.
Just as you've perfectly said, I think that this is the reason why we all try to put our hands together to educate the public and get people to know these things so that we can all add our voices to reach the governments and to reach the industries to see what individually we can also do. Personally, I believe that it's not too late to save the planet or to turn things around, because we definitely can make a change. Though about a few years ago, I was just looking for this UN programs, and I saw climate adaptation. From a waste management background, I was like, what's this? Because climate adaptation, literally it makes sense, but I was wondering what it was about. Since you were here, I think it's better to ask you, what is climate adaptation and what will be our roles at individual levels, international bodies, governments, individuals? What is climate adaptation and what can we do in this sense?
Thanks a lot. So basically, I mean, since 92, when they adopted the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and all these conferences kept happening, the Conference of Parties and all of that, a lot of focus have been about we need to cut our emissions, our carbon emissions. This was the number one solution: cut carbon emissions, we stabilize the planet, we heal our ozone layer, and then everything probably gets better. The challenge is that there are two things here, right? One is you have a tap open with the water flowing. Okay, so the water is flowing and your room is getting flooded. If you keep mopping the floor, you are not going to fix it because the tap is still flowing. So your room will keep flooded. So the best solution at that point was, let's close the tap. Let's work quickly to close the tap and then we can mop the floor, right? So then from that time, we kept a lot of policies came out on carbon reduction and then REDD+ programs, emission reduction programs, and all of this, the carbon development mechanism, compensation programs, and all of these things started happening. Well, after some years, we realized that no, industry still keeps polluting and emissions are not dropping, and they just keep going up. So, of course, at some point, after the 2000s, then again, there were new commitments coming up, right? There were new commitments coming up. Okay, a company promised by 2030, by 2050, by 2100, because the urgency was not felt. Okay, so we keep doing this. And still, we did not mop the floor, which is what I found very, very interesting. So we want to stop the flooding in the room. The tap is on. We said we're going to close the tap before we mop the floor, but the tap is still running. After 10 years, the tap is still running. We realize that the tap is not really reducing, and we are not also mopping the floor. So the water levels are increasing, the tap is still flowing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the case. So then at some point, of course, someone has to think about, okay, guys, if the tap is still flowing and we are not reducing we can't close it, maybe we should start getting some of the water out of the room. All right, let's start saving some of the property in the room, because at some point we ourselves we're going to drown. And this was the concept of adaptation, that at this point we have passed the point where even if we stop our emissions today, even if we close the tap now, we have enough water in the room, which will still cause a lot of damage to property.
Yeah.
So let's start putting some of the properties out of this room such that the water doesn't destroy it. And that is to say that let's start looking at countries where the water is drowning them, so that they can, of course, get out of the room, get some infrastructure to protect them, get some support in a way that while we work on closing the tap and stopping the water from coming, we don't lose lives and we don't destroy properties. So that was the start of the start for the conversation on adaptation. The only challenge is that the world and the economics of the world did not still see the urgency of the conversation.
Yeah.
So it still went back to no, we need to close the tap. We need to try and close the tap because that is where the water is coming from. And once we close it, we can of course protect the rest of the people, and that we can work it out. So the finance needed for countries, and I'm going to mention some countries. The finance for countries like Bangladesh, tropical cyclones and floods. Pakistan is an example. India is an example in terms of temperature rise and floods. I mean, in Africa, I can think of Mozambique as an example. We can think about Sudan with floods as an example. Ethiopia, good example.
Yeah.
With all the drought, recurring drought for decades. I mean, these are years of recurring droughts. You can't even get out of it. The Sahelian Strip droughts. But instead of giving them the infrastructure and the resources they need to adapt to the situation, said that they don't lose so much, the world was still focused on we have to close the tap and reduce emissions. So a lot of resources went into that until the point where now it is essential because the tap is not closing. Carbon emissions and the global carbon emissions above background concentrations, I just keep getting high. And for the past few years, every year is the highest. Every year,
Yeah.
same with temperature records. Every year, warmest. It keeps happening. Look, it's about time we split it equally and say, okay, we need half of our efforts focusing on closing the tap and the other half on protecting people. We can't put 100% of our effort in closing the tap when the tap is actually not closing. And you're just giving us net zero future, net carbon, whatever, carbon free future. I mean, if it would have happened, it would have happened by now. Work on that for those who need it at this moment. Like I said, my family in the village, my friends in Sudan, my colleagues in Ethiopia who are pastoral farmers living, taking their cattle to, they need the grass, they need the water, right? For communities in northern Ghana, they need the water. The water comes, it comes as flood, and then it doesn't come again. And then they have a dry period for so many months. And this is very much difficult for livelihoods. We saw last year, Sudan had a century worst floods. This is insane. We look at Mozambique, they had Cyclone Idai in 2019. Just early this year, as they were recovering from Cyclone Idai, they had Cyclone Eloise. It's just recurring. How do you even survive this? Just imagine, put yourself in that shoe as a young person. You had 1 year of a cyclone, schools are destroyed, you can go to school, you can go to job, your whole year is gone. Now you try to recover from it, you are trying to get yourself back with a job, you set up a shop again, you're trying to get back, another cyclone, poof. How do you make a life out of this? How do you create an ambition out of this? What is your future out of this? So it's really not that simple, and hence I hate it when we make all the conversations about flying less, eating less meat, consumer minimalism. It's important, it's good, but look, that will not save the person who is going to suffer flood the next flooding season, the next raining season. It's not going to do anything for the person who is thinking about the next dry season and how the person is going to eat and survive. That person needs resources now to invest in water harvest technologies, to invest in some deep drilling and reservoir construction to be able to continue the agriculture. That person needs a lot of infrastructure to prevent flooding from happening.
Yeah.
That is needed now, and that is what adaptation is about. It is not to say that we accept that the climate crisis is just a climate crisis and it's going to happen, so we don't do anything. No, it's saying that we're going to do something. We've been doing something. At this point, some people need the resources and the energy and the capacity to be able to face the climate impact they are seeing now. So, for instance, maybe if you stay in some city in Norway or in some Germany, maybe you don't think about this because you've never seen a cyclone before, you've never suffered a heavy drought where you had a severe food shortages, you've never seen farming before. So for you, this context is a bit loose, and you rather say that, oh, I need to fly less because that is important to reduce the carbon emissions. I will eat less meat. This is important. I will not need to save energy. I will use the bicycle. Perfect, great. That is important. We all need to do that. The other bit which no one is talking about is we also need to protect those who are seeing the floods today, and not just using those as a reason to advocate for flying less. And this is a big problem for me. Then there's a flooding somewhere, and then people are saying climate change is real and we need to do something. We need to stop all carbon emissions right away. That is not going to change the situation for that person next year. The place will still be flooded. It's not going to change it. If they don't get the investment to build resilient roads, resilient drainage system, resilient housing infrastructure, they will still get flooded. The carbon emission effort will not do anything for them. So this is really the core message for adaptation. What we all can do, we need to get this message out there. We need to get people to see the story from this narrative, and not just from the narrative of, we reduce carbon emissions. And there, company A is cutting their carbon emissions by 50%. Thank you very much. You should have done this long ago. It's too late now. So you cut it by 50%, but we also need money, and we also need technology transfers. We also need resource and capacity building for the small island states who are just drowning into the ocean because of the mess that the developed world has created. And they don't need eating less meat. They need something more urgent now, and that is very important. I might sound as if I'm not in favor of all these solutions, eating less meat, flying less. I trust all of them. I advocate for them as well. It's just that when I think about, when I put it in perspective, where I'm coming from, the relational capital I have with people and contacts and the people I talk to on an everyday basis, there is something urgent more than that. Yeah.
When I listen to you talk, what about the individual people who are just going about their everyday thing? What can they do when it comes to climate adaptation?
First of all, because adaptation is local, it's very local. Yeah. And this is also why it didn't get a lot of momentum at the international level, because the point is someone cannot do something in Sweden for someone in Sudan to benefit when there's a flood, right? It has to happen in Sudan to prevent the flood from coming into your room. So it's very, very local. So what individuals in this case need and have to do is building their capacities on how to adapt, right? We need to build those capacities, and it's a big range of things, and a core component of that is education, because you need to understand the hazard you are talking about. If your hazard is floods, if your hazard is cyclones, if your hazard is drought, if your hazard is urban heat islands, whatever, you need to understand that very well to see what can you do to really reduce the impact of that when it happens. Because after all, adaptation is the process of adjustment to actual climate impacts and expected climate impacts to moderate the harm that will happen, because it's inevitable. You're going to have the impact. You need to moderate the harm and see if you can get a benefit out of the harm. And this is very important. So it's really a lot of capacity building and understanding it. Earlier, we talked about, you mentioned wetlands, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned constructed wetlands. And this is essential, because in a situation where someone really wants to adapt to coastal flooding, then the point would be, even in a very better way, in an ecosystem adaptation way, ecosystem-based adaptation way, would be to create an artificial wetland or to create a constructed wetland which buffers the extra water that comes during this particular season, coastal water coming inland, and then even take benefit of that to grow rice or to grow something else in that marshy area, which then could support livelihood. Right. So this is really the concept of adaptation. And for that to happen, we all need to understand the risk we are dealing with. We need to understand the vulnerabilities. And if the vulnerability is that, we all need health insurance across the whole country, said that if you get a headache from temperatures, you can get to the hospital and you are not vulnerable, and you because of the fear of the cost of the hospital bill, you lose your life. right? And we know that already in Ghana and in other parts of Africa as well, we know that increasing temperatures and the heat is already driving heat stroke, right? For people who stand in the sun for longer hours, this is really dangerous. How are we adapting our work and the livelihood of these people to that? Okay, do we then have to set up mini kiosks with a bit of cooling, or do we have to come up with new architecture in terms of housing that provides natural cooling instead of the traditional way of building where you need a fan or an air condition? This is what we mean, when we talk about adaptation. But to do any of this, one, capacity, education, the technical capacity, and the money to actually act. That also becomes relevant.
Education, I think that is so important. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this podcast, why don't you consider subscribing to this podcast? We come your way this and every Sunday at 6 p.m. GMT. Consider leaving a comment or giving us a 5-star. This helps others to be able to find this content. Reach out on our social media platforms and we will love to get in touch with you. See you on the next episode. Until then, live green.